When we talk about surrogacy, exactly what are we talking about? What is the legal definition?
Okay, when someone can't carry their own child for a number of reasons, you then obtain consent, in this situation now from court, so that someone else can carry your baby. And then we've got variables, whether it's your own genetic material, both from both parents, the intending parents we're referring to.
Just to break that down for me, when we talk about genetic material, what are we talking about?
Okay, we're referring to the eggs and the sperms. That's what you need to do the in vitro fertilization in order to resolve or to result in a pregnancy. And then if it's not possible to use your own material, you may use that of a donor egg or a donor sperm.
Now, how widely known or understood is surrogacy in South Africa? Is it a relatively new concept here?
I don't think it's new in South Africa. However, I think there's a lot more interest in it. We have a lot of infertility in the country. According to statistics, it's 1 out of every 6. And now with our new legislation since last year, I think people are more prone to investigate the possibility of surrogacy than that of adoption.
Now, who's opting for surrogacy? I mean, besides Elton John and Sarah Jessica Parker, but more and more, who in South Africa is opting for surrogacy these days?
I think we've got a number of categories where people are interested in doing that. We work with people, same-sex couples or single parents. Even according to our legislation, the people don't have to be married. So can it be a single mum or a single dad? And then when people can't have their own child due to infertility, or as Mandy referred to, an incompetent uterus or cervix, if they can't carry full term, then that is an option to consider.
Legal structures around surrogacy underwent a change last April, and attorney Adele van Walt, who rejoins us, is well versed in how these changes affect the legal process now. Adele, tell me about that. What's changed?
Okay, before last year, the 1st of April 2010, the process from a legal perspective was very informal. There was no requirement that the surrogacy agreement had to be even in writing. So sometimes people had a verbal agreement between them, other times they had it in writing. After the 1st of April, we've got a bit of red tape. The specific act regulating this is saying that it should be in writing. There should be specific requirements. I can maybe just name a few.
Yes.
The surrogate mother has to have at least one child of her own.
Why is that?
That is the risk, the risk with the emotional side of it, that the surrogate mother might decide to keep the child, is definitely going to be minimized if she has had at least one pregnancy and child of her own.
If a surrogate mother should decide halfway through the pregnancy that she doesn't want to give up the child, what happens then?
Okay, maybe I should answer and say before the act and after the act how it changed.
Okay.
Before the act, this was the biggest concern for all the parties really involved. The surrogate was always concerned that the parents-to-be might decide not to take the child, especially if there's some deformity of some kind. On the other hand, the intending parents or the to-be parents were always concerned that the surrogate might decide not to hand over the child. So it was always these two risks.
A grey area.
Yes. Now after the act, with the red tape in place, before you can even start with the in vitro fertilization, you have to go through this court procedure with the screening, the emotional side, the medical side, and then of course the expectations from a legal perspective, what needs to be transparent also in the legal procedure and in the documentation. This gives certainty for all the parties involved, because now with this court order that you have to obtain before the in vitro fertilization can take place, you know for certain that if it's the genetic material, the genetic material that's a sperm and the egg of the parents-to-be, that court order will say that any child or children born from that agreement will be the child or children from these parents.
So if the mum and dad who provide the sperm and the egg, if they then are the legal parents, no matter that the surrogate carries the baby. Is that correct?
That's right. So even if the surrogate mother decides to change her mind, you've got a court order saying that it's your child.
What if it's a donor egg?
Okay, even so, if it's a donor egg or donor sperm, the Act still says, as long as if it is the genetic material of at least one of the two parents. So if it's then a parent to be being single, it must be the genetic material of that parent.
What if it's the surrogate's egg?
Okay, the legislation is trying to stay away from this because
Yes.
that's your highest risk. The legislation is saying that if the surrogate mother is using her own genetic material, she will have a cooling off period of 60 days after birth to decide whether she's
Okay.
keeping the child. So that is definitely an inherent risk.
Common pitfalls of surrogacy.
I think the expectations to start off with, it's important that the intending or to-be parents should communicate from the point go what the expectations are, and I think if there's any kind of deformities with a baby, to say beforehand, especially if they've been through a journey with medical treatment, cancer, whatever it might be, with what kind of deformities they won't be able to proceed with a specific pregnancy.
Okay.
If the surrogate mother decides that she won't abort this child at all, at no cost, no matter what kind of deformities we're talking about, and the intending parents might say, well, if we have a child without limbs, we won't be able to proceed with this pregnancy, then it's something important that needs to be screened beforehand with an expert social worker and a psychologist as well.
What can a surrogate expect in terms of support? Because while I know there's not a check written out at the end, obviously there's going to be medical tests and there's going to be needs and there's going to be a maternity leave period. What can she expect in terms of financial support?
Okay. The Act is saying that she won't be able to be compensated in cash or in kind, which makes it very difficult. Even if you do that for your own sister as an altruistic kind of pregnancy, you still want to say thank you. If we talk about numbers, it depends whether the surrogate mother is employed. If she's working and there's a loss of income, surely she needs to be compensated for that. Other than that, the in vitro fertilization cycles need to be discussed and also need to be planned beforehand. Because if there's going to be 2 or 3 or 4 maximum of that in 18 months time period, that needs to be taken in consideration with your figures.
Sure.
Other than that, the social worker assessment, psychological assessment, it depends with who you work. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have to have both. If you've got an experienced expert in this field, you will be able to get around between 4,000 to 6,000 rand for the assessment as well as a report.
Okay.
Over and above that, the court documentation, that's now the surrogacy agreement, together with the court application, all the affidavits supporting that, the screening of the report, settling that, all of that should not be more than between 20,000 to 25,000 rand. It depends if there's a domicilium issue. That's now where you work with foreigners. Our Act is actually saying that this is a qualifying factor now in the new legislation. But if that is a concern, surely it can become more expensive.
How much from start to finish would it cost a set of parents to go the surrogacy route? And I know I'm asking you how long is a piece of string, but give me a ballpark figure.
With 3 IVF cycles, between 30 and 60,000 rand, loss of income, it depends what kind of income you're talking about, real out-of-pocket medical expenses, and your court application, I would say between 100 and 200,000. It depends whether you've got someone that's employed. If she's not employed, surely, then she can ask for a domestic worker, for supplementation, for the medical expenses, and then for her maternity wear.
Does this assessment have to be so thorough?
This specific part of the emotional assessment forms part of the application to court. Okay. And before the Act changed, you had to bring or follow adoption procedure. Now it's not necessary anymore. With this specific court application, it actually covers that part of the adoption process. So the emotional assessment, the psychological assessment forms part of the fit and proper question and criteria in front of court.
What factors do you need to consider legally when you're going to go the surrogacy route?
First of all, we have to get all the factual information from the parents intending to be parents, as well as the surrogate and her husband. We work very closely with the specific fertility clinic that's involved with the treatment, the in vitro fertilization process, the screening, etc. And then we have to prepare all these documentation and get them ready. There are specific requirements that we have to meet in each and every application, but we try and have each party's specific request accommodated. So it's really pretty much an individual-based approach.
Now, you also mentioned earlier, for those who've only just tuned in now, you're looking at anything between 150 and 300,000 rand to facilitate the process of surrogacy. Although the surrogate doesn't take a fee, you're going to be responsible for medical costs and whether or not maternity leave is taken and whether or not she's employed. It's a lot of money, and it's out of the reach of many people. But you were mentioning during the break, it might not be as far out of reach as you think.
Yes, there are certain products available on the market, specific for in vitro fertilization, but then also to be able to finance a big portion of this expenses. So if the viewers are interested in it, we can provide them with that kind of information. I'll make it available on our website.
Okay, so we'll be able to get it after the show.
That's right.
And let's be honest, I mean, if you're going to spend 300,000 Rand on a car, it doesn't come close to the joy you'll feel.
That's right.
For a baby. Adele, common legal pitfalls that parents and surrogates don't take into account.
As I've mentioned beforehand, the expectation of both parties, I think that needs to be scrutinized up front. Other than that, the relationship and the agreement between the parties that needs to be concluded, and that what we can include in such an agreement, whether you can have corrective surgery for plastic surgery for the surrogate mum, whether we can or should put in life coverage, whether guardians should be appointed. So that's the kind of information that we will require. As I've said, the other aspects has really been a considering factor. I think now with the legislation is really being regulated. So there's legal certainty for all the parties involved, knowing that as soon as they've obtained a court order, they will know once a baby is born, there's legal certainty for all the parties involved, and that includes the little baby that's born.
If parents out there can take away one thing, thinking with their heads and not with their heart, what would you like it to be?
I think there's hope out there for all the people that are childless. There will be hope. And I think if people need to obtain information, we get so many calls, whether it's surrogates, whether it's intending parents. Knock on people's doors, be informed, get your message and obtain information.
Information is power. We're going to have all those details on our website later. It is a complex, but it's potentially very rewarding option. Make sure you are with the right people. Make sure you have looked at all the factors, because as important as it is to fulfill that need in your heart, you also have to remember there are other people involved.